Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everybody, to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. Hello, Nan.
Hi, Steve.
We have a really cool show for you today. It's a show that I've been wanting to do for a long, long time. And it's all about a toxic love triangle.
Because you love the toxic.
I love the toxic. You know, I think there's been love triangles since the beginning of time. You think about Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie.
Dear.
Well, there was never a more toxic triangle than the actress Barbara Peyton, the actor Franchot, and Tom NEAL, also an actor. And we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to get into some really interesting details about this trio. In the mid-20th century, Hollywood was a place of glitz and glamour, and where dreams could be made or destroyed in an instant. And it was also an era where the silver screen crafted illusions of romance and perfection, yet behind the scenes was a different story. You know, the personal lives of the stars were often a mess. They were unraveling, chaotic, scandalous, tragic.
And we often didn't hear about them because social media wasn't around.
And they had publicists who cleaned it up and kept these things out of the press. Well, this story, it really is one of the wildest rides you'll ever hear about from old Hollywood. And it involved the volatile love triangle involving, as I mentioned, Barbara Peyton and actors Franchot and Tom NEAL. And what began as this passionate romance, it descended into this obsessive, violent, and ultimate ruination for all three of them. And it really becomes this cautionary tale of unchecked desire and self-destruction. Well, Barbara Peyton, she was a flashy beauty, a rising starlet whose undeniable charisma and talent earned her the attention in Hollywood. As you would imagine, somebody who looks like that, you're going to go to Hollywood and get discovered. Well, behind her captivating presence was a woman drawn to dangerous men and reckless choices.
Right. Very key to this story.
Yes, exactly. Her affair with Franchot was, and Franchot, he was this refined, well-respected actor. And then she also got involved with actor Tom NEAL, who was polar opposite. He was this rugged, temperamental he-man. Well, this triangle would explode into one of Hollywood's most scandalous incidents. It culminates in the brutal beating that made national headlines. And it was more than just tabloid fodder. It was a tragic unraveling of three careers and lives, fueled by obsession, betrayal, and this toxic circle of passion. So we're going to get into it. And we're going to first introduce you to Barbara Peyton.
Well, Barbara Peyton was born in my home state.
I know, Minnesota girl.
Yes. She was born Barbara Lee Redfield on November 16th, 1927 in Cloquet, Minnesota.
Do you know where that is?
I do. And Jessica Lange is also from Cloquet, Minnesota.
That's right.
Yes.
A lot of great people from Minnesota.
Well, Barbara was one of 6 children. Her parents, Flip and Mabel, owned a restaurant. And when she was around 10, the family moved to Odessa, Texas, where her father bought and operated a series of tourist cabins. Raised in a conservative, traditional family, Peyton seemed like an unlikely person for Hollywood infamy. Her early life was pretty normal, but she was restless and clearly drawn to excitement from a young age. As a teenager, she blossomed into a striking beauty, and she developed a rebellious spirit and a penchant for older men.
Oh, Barbara. It didn't take her long to learn that her beauty and her desirability, it could open doors for her. In 1943, actor James Cagney, who Barbara Peyton had the biggest crush on, she loved him. Well, he came to Odessa on a war bond rally. Well, she didn't have a ticket to the show, but this local boy did. And he told her that he would give her his ticket if she would let him touch her breast.
Okay.
Well, Barbara, seeing an opportunity and seeing that she's got the goods that can open these doors, she let him.
Wow. Okay.
So she got to go see James Cagney, her idol. Something clicked because she learned then that there's power in her sexuality.
Right.
Which comes into play so many times in her life thereafter.
Right.
She was highly sexualized at a young age. She actually lost her virginity at the age of 15 to the father of one of her school chums while this surprise birthday party's going on downstairs.
I wish you all out there could see my face right now. Well, restless and bored, she wanted out of Texas. So Payton elopes with her high school sweetheart, William Hodge, in November of 1943. She's only 16.
Yeah.
Her parents find out and, of course, are livid. They quickly have the marriage annulled, but this short-lived relationship really kind of foreshadows the turbulent love life that would later define her public persona.
Yeah.
In 1944, she meets her second husband, decorated combat pilot John Payton, who was stationed nearby. The couple married on February 10th, 1945. When her new husband asked her where she wanted to go for their honeymoon, Payton quickly replied, Hollywood. So they soon moved to Los Angeles, where John Payton enrolled at USC under the GI Bill. Within 2 years, they welcomed a son, John Lee Payton. By all accounts, Payton was a good mother, but she still was restless and feeling really confined by her life as a housewife and a mother. So when her little son, John Lee, was old enough, she started modeling.
And working as a model, it didn't take long for Hollywood talent scouts to start sniffing around a little bit. It seems like there was talent scouts on every corner back then.
Where are they now?
I know. Well, she was noticeable. She had this platinum hair, these piercing blue eyes, and this sultry charm that was hard to ignore. So this led to a contract with Universal Studios. Well, around this time, she separated from her husband, and she and her son took an apartment in Hollywood. Well, at the time, she was quoted as saying, "Why should I be married to one man, have a dull life, and raise a family when I can have all this glamour?"
Well, and she got some glamour. Her feature film debut is in an uncredited role as a photographer in the romantic comedy Once More My Darling, 1949, starring Robert Montgomery and Anne Blythe. In her next film, the film noir classic Trapped, 1949, she actually gives a really captivating lead performance that won over critics and audiences, which then led to her receiving a screen test at MGM to play the young mistress of Louis Calhern in The Asphalt Jungle, 1950. Yes. Of course, the role eventually went to Marilyn Monroe.
And if you haven't seen Trapped, it's a really good movie, and she's wonderful. She really had talent. And that's the tragic part. We realize she really was gifted. It was during this time that her personal life began to heat up. In 1949, she found herself in the news because her current boyfriend, gangster Don Cougar, I love his name is Don Cougar.
Of course.
He beat up her landlady, tried to give her partial payment for Payton's rent, and the landlady was not having it, so Don Cougar beat the landlady up. So this puts her name in the press, not in a good way. Not good. The people she started to hang out with in Hollywood, not the most upright citizens. Well, in 1950, she got a major career boost when she was handpicked to star opposite her childhood crush, James Cagney, in the film Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. This was another feather in her cap, and her future looked really bright. James Cagney's brother, William, who was an attorney and also a producer, was so taken with her that he placed her under personal contract. This was shared equally with Jack Warner at Warner Brothers. It was long rumored that they were also having an affair at the time, which, knowing her track record, I would not doubt this.
Right.
She soon was appearing in films opposite Gary Cooper in Dallas, 1950, Gregory Peck in Only the Valiant in 1951, and her career was starting to really take off, and it seemed as though she was destined for A-list fame.
It really does.
It seemed, yeah.
Yeah.
But no.
It's because her personal life was a whirlwind of scandal, marked by a series of torrid love affairs and impulsive decisions. As you say, she had a taste for danger, gravitating toward men who were as reckless as she was. Her inability to separate love from obsession, along with her growing reputation for really being self-destructive,
totally,
made her a fixture in the Hollywood gossip columns. I mean, this is fodder that they would just lap up like a kitty to milk.
Eat up, yeah.
She was romantically linked to such bad boys as Howard Hughes, George Raft, Steve Cochran, who we've dedicated an entire episode to on this podcast, and John Ireland. She was actually engaged multiple times and even had a brief relationship with comedian Bob Hope. But none of her relationships would prove as infamous or destructive as the one that would develop between her and Franchot and Tom NEAL.
By the time she met Franchot, I mean, he was legit. He was an Oscar-nominated actor, very legitimate actor. But Payton was already enjoying the fast life. She enjoyed the perks of fame while ignoring the warning signs of impending danger. Whereas Tone, he seemed like an odd match for her. But their relationship was, well, at least initially, it was promising.
Wouldn't you think they would be a good match? He would not calm her down, but he would smooth her out her rough edges. And
I think that was the draw. I think he saw a little Pygmalion situation where he was going to get her and mold her and make her into this refined wife.
Which isn't good either.
Yeah. And she was drawn to his stability. And I think that was the attraction.
Yeah.
But then there's Tom Neal, who's the He-Man, masculine, sexy guy. So she's really torn there. Well, we're going to get a little bit into the life of Franchot Tone.
So he was born February 27th, 1905 in Niagara Falls, New York. Unlike many actors of his time, he actually came from a privileged background. His family was well established and his father was a successful industrialist. So Tone received a really elite education attending Cornell University, where he cultivated an appreciation for literature and theater and the finer things in life. He really did have that sophisticated demeanor. You almost think that he is from Europe or London or something.
I kind of thought he was from London.
I did too. I always did.
He just has that air.
So combined with that and the classical training that he got, it really set him apart from the rougher, more rugged leading men of that era. His acting career began, as it does for so many, on the stage. He gained recognition as a member of the group theater in New York City. So he was working alongside legendary folks like Clifford Odets and Lee Strasberg, and at the same time sharpening his craft in a setting that prioritized the realism of acting during the day and emotional depth as opposed to that sort of more
artificial. Yeah, exactly.
So his refined presence and ability to portray both romantic charm and that deep emotional intensity caught the attention of Hollywood, leading him to sign a contract with MGM in the early 1930s.
Well, during the golden age of Hollywood, he became a very sought-after actor, appearing in a variety of films that showcased his versatility. He was in Dancing Lady with Clark Gable and Joan Crawford from 1933, and he later gained his Academy Award nomination for Mutiny on the Bounty in 1935.
But his personal life was far from being as composed as that on-screen persona that he played. He married Joan Crawford in 1935, but their marriage was tumultuous, filled with career conflicts and personal struggles. They divorced in 1939. Tone continued to be a Hollywood bachelor, engaging in lots of high-profile relationships, but never quite finding any kind of stability. His second wife was actress Jean Wallace, with whom he had 2 sons. They divorced in 1949. Wallace went on to marry actor Cornell Wilde.
Well, by the time that Tone met Barbara Peyton in early 1950, some say that they met at Ciro's, others say it was Macombo, but regardless, they met and it was just electric from the get-go. He was in his mid-40s, past his Hollywood prime for sure. He was still a respected actor, but he no longer was the matinee idol he once was. Whereas Peyton, on the other hand, she was 2 decades younger, and she embodied the kind of youthful passion and recklessness that both intrigued and kind of scared him. So despite their differences, the two quickly fell for each other. Barbara so crudely said in the biography Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye by John O'Dowd, and this is the quote, "I went out with every male star in town. They wanted my body and I needed their name for success. Franchot Tone, suave, likable, quiet, unexciting Franchot, asked me to do a play with him in New York. He was hooked on me. He believed in me too. That was the route I had to travel. He spelled it out for me and I read him. Kiss me and your troubles are over, right? So I went to East with Franchot. The two went on to New York and they appeared in September of 1950 in the play The Second Man."
Well, in October of 1950, Tone and Payton become engaged. Shortly after this, Payton received some bad publicity for appearing as a character witness in the murder trial of alleged mobster Stanley Adams, who was a friend of hers.
You lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas, as my grandmother would say. Who are these people she's hanging out with?
Yeah, well, and Tone failed to recognize, or maybe he was just ignoring it, was that she was not going to be the wife that he was hoping.
She was a wild buck.
Yeah. By the middle of 1951, Tone had heard gossip that Payton was fooling around with one of her movie co-stars. So Tone hires a private detective, I mean, you could make a movie out of this, to tail Barbara and catches her with actor Guy Madison. But despite this, Tone Payton remained dedicated to the couple's engagement.
Oh, I would have taken that ring back so fast.
Yeah.
In July of that same year, Franchot had to go to New York for some business, and he left Barbara Peyton all alone in Hollywood, left her to her own devices, which is problematic because she soon met this up-and-coming actor, Tom Neal, who was rugged and handsome and sexy, and their chemistry was electric. They were soon hot and heavy, and she even moved him into her house while Franchot was away. Well, her heart was really divided between these two men, the cultured, elegant Franchot and the raw, dangerous passion of Tom Neal. And we're going to talk about Tom Neal, but first, I think we're going to take a little break and we're going to give you our pop quiz question of the day.
And the question is, what well-known star befriended Barbara Peyton on a film shoot, and when things got really tough for her, this well-known star tried to help by getting her a role on his popular TV show, only to be shut down by the network who refused to hire her. So who was this well-known star who tried to help Barbara Peyton? We'll be back with the answer and more after this.
Steve and Ed will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. As Steve said at the top of this episode, Hollywood love triangles are as old as the Hollywood sign itself. They're still a thing today. And the trio they're talking about in this episode are nowhere near the only three pretty people to get mixed up with each other. So if you'd like to check out a few other triangles, why not Google the following stars? There is, of course, Nancy Sinatra, Frank Sinatra, and Ava Gardner, Rita Hayworth, Orson Welles, Ali Khan, and who could forget Debbie Reynolds, Eddie Fisher, and Elizabeth Taylor? Like they used to sing on Schoolhouse Rock, 3 is a magic number. You might have to Google that one too. And now back to Steve and Nan from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get further to the toxic triangle of Payton, Tone, and Neal, we're going to give a special shout out to our listener of the week. This one's a good one. One of my favorite people on the planet. Our listener of the week is Scott Jenkinger. People may know Scott is a very well-known casting director. He's a longtime friend of mine. I just adore this man, and he's a loyal follower of our show. In fact, I just ran into him at an event, and he had a lot to say about The Wizard of Oz. And in fact, the thing that struck me the most that he said was, why in the 11th hour was Judy Garland not given another song? Instead, they give a song to the lion.
Yes.
If I Were the King of the Forest. That should have been a song for her. And I never thought about it. And he made a really great point, and I totally agree.
And when we were watching Wizard of Oz, we commented on how long that song is. It goes on. I mean,
it does.
I love the guy, but
Yeah.
it goes on. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
And side note, Scott actually cast me in a TV show.
Oh, so Scott,
circle.
you are our listener of the week.
Yay, thanks, Scott.
We love you.
All right. If Franchot represented this refined, old-school charm of Hollywood's golden era, Tom Neal, that third point in this triangle, was the opposite. He's rugged, he's hot-tempered, he's unpredictable. He's got this volatile nature that made him irresistible to Barbara and dangerous.
Girls love those bad boys.
Some do, yeah. Neal's background and personality made him a stark contrast to this polished Hollywood gentleman, but it was what attracted Payton. However, what began as passion quickly spiraled into obsession and jealousy.
Well, a little bit about Tom Neal. He was born January the 28th, 1914 in Evanston, Illinois, and he grew up in a relatively comfortable middle-class family. He attended Northwestern University, where he was a standout boxer.
You can see that in him.
Tab that a little bit, because the boxing's going to come into play in a little bit. He was also a football player, and his athletic background gave him a physical presence that would later define his screen persona. Mm-hmm. But it also hinted at the violent tendencies that would emerge in his personal life. Unlike Tone, who pursued acting as an artistic calling, Neal saw Hollywood as a means to an end. After moving to Los Angeles, he found work in B movies, often playing tough guys and gangsters or romantically aggressive anti-heroes. His most famous role came in Detour, 1945, which is a low-budget film noir that would later be considered a cult classic. And in fact, I just watched the pilot for Your Friends and Neighbors with John Hamm the other night. And John Hamm is watching this movie, Detour, throughout the pilot, which I love.
So fun.
Little side note there. Well, in the film Detour, Neal played this down-on-his-luck drifter who's ensnared by fate, and this femme fatale played by Anne Savage in a role that eerily mirrors his real-life entanglements.
Well, he never was a major star, but he had a dedicated fan base and enough industry connections, which is key to maintain a steady career. He appeared in other films such as Another Thin Man, 1939, Crime, Inc., 1945, Blonde Alibi, 1946, and I Shot Billy the Kid in 1950. His professional success, though, was overshadowed by this temper and really erratic behavior. He's divorced from his first wife, singer Vicki Lane, when he and Payton meet. He had a reputation for being really possessive in relationships, and rumors circulated that he was prone to these violent outbursts. Despite all these red flags, like don't go after this guy, Barbara Peyton was just drawn to that.
Like a moth to a flame.
Yeah. She describes her attraction to him in her autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed. This is a quote. I was hung on him. When we made love, flowers sprouted, and Cupid got a medal. Those were toe-tingling days and nights, but it was the train to nowhere. That's like dialogue out of a film noir, if ever there was.
Totally sounds like dialogue from a film noir.
I should have delivered it better, but okay.
Well, when Payton met Neal in the early 50s, she was already involved with Tone, but their chemistry was just undeniable. It was built on this foundation of intense passion and reckless abandon. And unlike Tone, who treated Barbara with old-fashioned romance and respect, Neal's love was fiery and aggressive and suffocating. Their relationship was fueled by late nights and alcohol and passionate arguments, and despite this volatility, Payton could not pull herself away. She was obsessed with this guy.
Right.
And Neal quickly became also obsessed with her, growing increasingly jealous of her relationship with Tone. While Tone saw himself as Payton's protector and provider, Neal saw Tone as this weak, aging rival who had no place in her life. Well, the situation escalated as Payton bounced between the two men, kind of playing them against each other. She was unable or maybe unwilling to really commit to either one of them. Well, she was intoxicated by this contrast between them. Tone represented safety and stability, and Neal embodied danger and passion.
But for Neal, he wasn't willing to share her with anybody else. His jealousy boiled over into resentment, and soon it was clear that there was going to be a confrontation between the two men. It was inevitable. Neal was not the type to walk away quietly, and his possessiveness turned into rage. So the love triangle is heading toward an explosive breaking point. It's going to leave Hollywood stunned, and it's going to change the lives of all three of them forever.
So by 1951, the love triangle, it's in full flash. It's going strong. But it also reached its boiling point. Payton was still unable to choose between these two men, and she's going back and forth, and her decision really stoked the fire of rivalry between these two guys, and inevitably it was going to implode. Well, it did. And the confrontation that would cement this scandal in Hollywood infamy took place on September the 14th, 1951 at Barbara Peyton's home at 1803 Courtney Avenue in Hollywood. If you want to drive by, it's still there. Well, Tone was still deeply in love with Barbara, and he believed he'd finally won her over. However, Tom Neal was far from willing to accept this. So while Tone had been away on a film project, Payton actually moved Tone into her home, as I'd mentioned. And on this date, Tone came back into town, and Barbara spent the entire day with him at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Later, they had dinner at Ciro's, and sometime after 1 a.m., the inebriated Tone and Payton returned to her house to find an equally inebriated Tom and some of his buddies there. Well, the two men confronted each other, but when Franchot Tone tripped over Tom Neal's weights, he realized that Neal had been living there, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Tone challenged Neal to a fight, and they took it outside.
So they step outside, and it's just this brutal and shocking event. Neal, as you mentioned, former boxer and a football player, he launches into a savage attack on Tone, pummeling him into unconsciousness. Witnesses later described the assault as relentless and vicious. Tone suffered a shattered cheekbone, a broken nose, and a severe brain concussion. He was left battered, bloodied, and nearly unrecognizable. When the police and the paramedics arrived, they found Tone lying on the ground in a pool of his own blood, clinging to consciousness.
Wow.
And Neal, showing no remorse, stands victorious, like he's won the match.
Yeah.
Believing that he had asserted his dominance over his rival. And Barbara Peyton, in the aftermath of the attack, seemed torn between horror for what was laying at her feet and admiration for her boyfriend, her other boyfriend.
Says a lot about her.
Yeah, and really the toxic nature of this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, this scandal, it exploded across the newspapers and the gossip columns with headlines sensationalizing every detail of this brutal fight. I mean, Hollywood had seen its fair share of scandals, but this was something different. It was raw and violent and deeply humiliating for all three parties. Franchot, who was once his elegant leading man, was reduced to being a battered victim. Tom Neal, already known for these violent outbreaks, was now firmly branded as a dangerous and unstable man. Barbara Peyton, meanwhile, was portrayed as this reckless femme fatale at the center of it all, and her reputation was damaged way beyond repair.
Yeah, and the studios quickly distanced themselves from all three actors. Franchot, despite his injuries, he attempts to save his career and dignity, but it really left a lasting stain on his image. Tom Neal, even though he quote-unquote won the fight, he had effectively destroyed his chance of any further success in Hollywood. Who's going to hire him?
Yeah, this volatile hothead.
And then Barbara Peyton, this is the scandal marking the beginning of her really tragic decline. So despite the beating, incredibly, this is what I want to take her and shake her. Barbara Peyton still is wavering between the two men following the attack.
After all this.
Yeah. So she briefly reconciles with Tone and continues this idea of the engagement, but the damage is already done. And Hollywood, man, they like to put you up on the pedestal and then knock you down, and they're pretty unforgiving once you're down. And Barbara's name was now synonymous with scandal and recklessness and poor judgment.
Despite the severe injuries inflicted by Tom Neal, Franchot made a remarkable effort to regain control of his life. He underwent extensive medical treatments, including facial reconstructive surgery, and he tried to salvage his dignity in the eyes of the public. Incredibly, just weeks after the attack, Barbara Peyton, in a decision that baffled even those closest to her, went through with her engagement to Franchot. The two had a brief, disastrous marriage that lasted only 53 days, and whether Tone truly believed he could save Barbara Peyton or whether his pride pushed him to follow through on the marriage, it's unclear, but the damage was certainly done, and Peyton was still drawn to Tom Neal. And her inability to fully detach from him contributed heavily to the rapid deterioration of that marriage.
So after the divorce, Tone is attempting to rebuild his career, but he just can never gain his former standing. He does continue to work, appearing in television and smaller film roles, but his name just becomes associated with that scandal. And his health also begins to decline, partly due to alcoholism, and he withdraws more and more from the public eye. Franchot passed away on September 18th, 1968, at the age of 63 from lung cancer. Though he had once been a respected leading man, his final years were really overshadowed by this violent love triangle that nearly cost him his life.
Things turned out even worse for Tom Neal. I mean, he might have won that fight, but his career was over. He was blacklisted by the studios, that nobody wanted to take a chance on an actor who was that volatile. And in a desperate attempt to revive his career, he tried working behind the scenes and later took on menial jobs, including gardening and working as a landscaper. His former image as this rugged leading man was now a distant memory. Well, after Peyton and Tone divorced, what do you think she does? She runs right back into Tom Neal's arms.
Of course.
But now they were this notorious couple, who Hollywood wanted nothing to do with. And so in an attempt to sort of regain their Hollywood status, they toured together in a racy stage production of The Postman Always Rings Twice. They also starred in the Western film The Great Jesse James Raid in 1953. The movie bombed at the box office, and the relationship between Peyton and Neal finally burned out. Well, after his time with Peyton, Neal's personal life remained chaotic. He married multiple times and even had a son with his second wife, but none of his relationships lasted. His violent temper never subsided, and his final act of infamy came in 1965 when he was arrested for and charged with the murder of his third wife, Gail Bennett, in Palm Springs. He claimed that the shooting was accidental, but the jury found him guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And when he got out of prison in 1971, he tried to live a quiet life, and he opened a landscaping business in Palm Springs. But the years of scandal and hardship had taken their toll. He died of a heart attack in 1972 at the age of 58. He was a tragic and broken man who once had this potential for great Hollywood stardom, but instead he became a symbol for self-destruction.
Yeah. Well, of all three of these folks, Barbara Peyton's downfall is maybe the most heartbreaking of all. So after her short-lived marriage to Franchot, that's done. Her relationship with Tom NEAL fizzled. So she tries to revive her career. No avail. The damage was done. Hollywood had turned its back on her, and her name was just synonymous with scandal. So offers dried up. Once this rising star, she finds herself struggling to make ends meet. She attempts to secure work in even low-budget films, but those opportunities just are not really there for her.
And she had a crushing blow in March of 1956 when she lost custody of her son, John Lee, after her ex-husband charged that she had exposed John Lee to profane language, immoral conduct, notoriety, unwholesome activities, and she had failed to provide the boy with moral education.
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't think she ever recovered from that.
No, that would be very difficult. She did marry a couple more times, but she continues to spiral into a cycle of alcoholism and drug abuse. She was arrested for bad checks. And she even starts to lean into prostitution.
Yeah. And, from what I've read, she started out as sort of a high-end prostitute. And by the end, they say she was just turning tricks for $5 in Hollywood and every Fleabag motel around. And she was kind of notorious in the Hollywood derelict scene. She was just part of the culture there.
In 1963, she released a ghost-written autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed, in which she details her experiences with Hollywood, with men, with the scandal that ruined her life. Many feel that the man who convinced her to write the salacious book, tabloid writer Leo Guild, manipulated her into writing it and plied her with booze to get the juicy stories out of her. And she was hoping, I'm sure, that the book would help her reclaim some semblance of control and probably money, right?
Yeah, she needed money so badly.
But it only cemented her reputation as a tragic cautionary tale.
Well, I think she really hit rock bottom when she was found beaten up and near death beside a dumpster behind a drugstore on Fairfax Avenue in February of 1967. She was then rushed to the hospital, but her condition was so grave, her chances of recovery seemed slim. She was then sent to live with her parents in San Diego to basically die. And a few months later, she did. On May 8th, 1967, Payton died at her parents' home, and she was only 39 years old. Wow. Her death was caused by heart and liver failure, which of course was brought on by those years of drugs and alcohol abuse. Her death was the final chapter in probably one of Hollywood's most infamous cautionary tales. It's a story of wasted potential and reckless passion and the unforgiving nature of fame.
It really is completely toxic and tragic. Barbara Peyton, Franchot, Tom NEAL. But more than that, it's this devastating saga that illustrates the really dark side of Hollywood. Each of them had been poised for greatness, but their fatal flaws, whether it was Peyton's self-destructive tendencies or NEAL's uncontrollable rage or Tone's misplaced devotion, whatever it was, it ensured that their lives would end in tragedy.
Yeah. Their story really remains one of Hollywood's most infamous cautionary tales. It's a reminder of how love, when mixed with obsession, violence, and fame, can lead to not happiness, but to ruin.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now that we got you all up and happy out there, what's the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz?
Well, the question was, what well-known star tried to help Barbara Peyton at her worst by getting her a part on his very popular television show? It was actually Raymond Burr, who she had met on the set of the silly adventure film Bride of the Gorilla in 1951. He tried to get her a role on Perry Mason.
Oh.
The network said no. They would not insure her and would not take a chance on her.
Right.
So, missed opportunity.
Well, God rest all of them.
Yes.
Hopefully they're at peace. We would love it, everyone, if you would give us a 5-star review, and if you would follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Check out the YouTube version of the podcast that you can watch.
And we love your emails. Please keep them coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor, Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher, John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.